The hallway was alive with the usual chaos of a high school morning. Students moved in every direction, some rushing to class while others lingered near lockers, chatting and laughing. The air buzzed with the sound of sneakers squeaking against tiled floors, backpack zippers being pulled, and voices overlapping in conversation. In the middle of it all stood Amara Johnson, a 16-year-old girl with an unshakable presence despite her petite frame. Her natural hair, styled into a proud afro, framed her face like a crown. She carried herself with quiet confidence, earning respect from teachers and admiration from peers, but not everyone saw her that way. Amara had always been different, not just because of her appearance, but because of how she carried herself. She didn't chase popularity or try to fit into cliques. Instead, she focused on what mattered most, excelling in her studies, supporting her friends, and staying true to who she was. But standing out came at a cost. There were those who didn't understand, or didn't care to understand, what made her unique. And today, one of them decided to make sure she knew exactly where she stood in their eyes. Derek Collins leaned casually against a row of lockers, his broad shoulders blocking part of the narrow hallway. He was the kind of guy who commanded attention, without even trying. A star football player with chiseled features and a cocky grin, Derek thrived on being the center of attention. But his charm masked something darker, a deep-seated need to assert dominance over anyone he deemed weaker than him. Today, his target was Amara. As she passed by, books tucked neatly under one arm, Derek pushed off the locker and stepped into her path. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look who we've got here, the queen of the jungle." His words drew snickers from a few nearby students, though most simply looked away, unwilling to intervene. Amara stopped mid-step, her dark eyes meeting his. She didn't say a word, but her expression spoke volumes. It wasn't anger, it was calm defiance. "Oh, come on," Derek continued, undeterred by her silence. "Don't tell me you're too good to talk now, or is it your hair? You know, I've seen birds' nests smaller than that thing on your head." He reached out as if to touch her afro, but thought better of it when she instinctively flinched. "Seriously though, don't you own a comb? Or are you trying to start some new trend?" His laughter echoed down the hallway, drawing more stares. Some students shook their heads in disapproval. Others smirked nervously, unwilling to cross. "Derek!" Amara's jaw tightened, but she refused to let him see her crack. She'd dealt with comments like these before, from strangers, classmates, even distant relatives. And each time she reminded herself of one thing. They only attacked what they didn't understand. Her hair wasn't just hair. It was a symbol of her identity, her culture, and her pride. To let someone like Derek diminish that would mean giving him power over her. And she wasn't about to do that. But Derek wasn't done yet. Seeing that his first jab hadn't rattled her, he switched tactics. "What's the deal anyway?" he asked, leaning closer so only she could hear. "Do you really think you're better than everyone else? Is that why you act like you're too cool to hang out with us normal people?" Amara raised an eyebrow, finally breaking her silence. "Funny," she said coolly. "I didn't realize normal meant picking fights with girls half your size." Her response caught him off guard for a split second, but Derek quickly recovered. "Oh, so now you do have something to say? Guess I struck a nerve, huh?" He grinned triumphantly, clearly enjoying himself. "But seriously, Amara, what's your secret? How does someone like you end up at the top of the class? Did they give you extra credit for, what's the word? Diversity points?" The comment hit harder than he expected. For a moment, Amara's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of hurt behind her steely gaze. Derek noticed it, and his grin widened. "Ah, there it is," he said, pointing at her. "Finally got to you, didn't I?" Before she could respond or walk away, a vibration startled her. Her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. At first she ignored it, determined not to let Derek distract her again. But the buzzing persisted, accompanied by a familiar ringtone. Against her better judgment, she pulled the phone out and glanced at the screen. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID. Malik. It was a FaceTime call. Malik was her older brother, her protector, her hero. Serving in the Marines, he was stationed overseas, which meant calls from him were rare and precious. Normally, she would have answered immediately, eager to hear his voice after weeks of silence. But answering now in front of Derek and everyone else felt risky. What if Malik said something embarrassing? What if Derek used it as fuel for more taunts? Yet something inside her urged her to pick up. Maybe it was the frustration boiling beneath the surface, or maybe it was the hope that hearing her brother's voice would ground her in this moment of tension. Whatever the reason, she tapped the green button and held the phone up to her face. "Hey, sis." Malik's deep, warm voice filled the hallway, cutting through the noise like a beacon. His face appeared on the screen, tan and rugged, with a smile that could light up any room. "How's my favorite girl doing?" For a brief second, Amara forgot where she was. She smiled back, relief washing over her. "Hey, Malik," she said, softly. "I'm okay." Malik's smile faltered as he took in his surroundings. His sharp eyes scanned the crowded hallway, lingering on the boy standing too close to his sister. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone shifting from playful to serious. "Who's that guy?" Derek, sensing the sudden change in energy, froze. He hadn't expected this twist. Now, instead of just facing Amara, he was staring into the camera lens and straight into the piercing gaze of someone who looked like they could snap him in, half without breaking a sweat. Amara hesitated, unsure how to explain, but Malik didn't wait for an answer. "Kid," he said firmly, addressing Derek directly, "why are you messing with my sister?" And just like that, the dynamic shifted, completely. Derek's smirk faltered the moment Malik's voice cut through the air. For a split second, he looked like a deer caught in headlights, unsure of how to react. His bravado, the very thing that had fueled his taunts just moments ago, seemed to evaporate under Malik's intense gaze. Amara watched silently, her phone still held up to her face as her brother stared Derek down through the screen. The hallway, once filled with chatter and movement, now felt eerily quiet, as if everyone could sense the shift in power. Malik didn't raise his voice, but there was an undeniable authority in his tone, a commanding presence that came from years of military training and leadership. "I asked you a question," he said, his words sharp and deliberate. "Why are you messing with my sister?" Derek opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. He glanced around nervously, searching for some kind of escape or distraction, but the eyes of the other students were fixed on him now. Some looked amused, others concerned, but none offered him any support. Even his usual crew of friends seemed to have melted away into the crowd, unwilling to get involved. It was just him, Amara, and Malik wasn't backing down. "You think it's funny to pick on someone smaller than you?" Malik continued, his voice steady but laced with warning. "You think being loud makes you tough? Let me tell you something, kid. I've faced real threats. People who would have taken your head off without blinking, and let me be clear, you're nothing." The words hit Derek like a punch to the gut. He took a step back, his shoulders slumping as the weight of Malik's words sank in. For the first time in a long while, he felt small, truly small. Not because Malik was physically intimidating, though the man's muscular build and stern expression certainly didn't help, but because Malik saw right through him. He saw the insecurity, the fear, the emptiness hiding behind Derek's cocky exterior. And worse, he called it out in front of everyone. Amara stood frozen, watching the scene unfold with a mix of emotions. Part of her wanted to stop Malik, to spare Derek the humiliation of being publicly dismantled. But another part of her, a deeper, more primal part, felt a surge of satisfaction. She'd spent so much time enduring insults and mockery, pretending they didn't hurt when in reality, each one had left a mark. Now finally someone was standing up for her, not just defending her, but exposing the bully for what he truly was. Derek tried to laugh it off, forcing a grin onto his face. "Relax, man," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It was just a joke, no harm done." But Malik wasn't buying it. "A joke?" he repeated, his eyebrows knitting together in disbelief. "You call tearing someone down a joke? You Think it's okay to make fun of someone's appearance, their intelligence, their worth, all because it makes you feel better about yourself. Derek's forced smile wavered. I didn't mean anything by it, he stammered, his confidence crumbling further with each word. I was just messing around. Messing around, Malik echoed, his tone dripping with disdain. That's what bullies always say when they're caught. I was just joking. It wasn't a big deal. But here's the thing. It is a big deal. Every insult, every put-down, every cruel remark, it all adds up. It chips away at someone's self-esteem, their sense of belonging. And trust me, kid, I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that. For a moment, Malik paused, his expression softening slightly. He leaned closer to the camera, his piercing gaze locking onto Derek's. Years ago, he began, his voice quieter but no less powerful. I was just like you. I thought being bigger, stronger, louder made me better than everyone else. I pushed people around, said things I shouldn't have, acted like I owned the world. And you know what? It didn't make me happy. It didn't make me stronger. All it did was make me miserable, and it hurt a lot of good people along the way. Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He wanted to look away, to break eye contact, but Malik's stare was magnetic. There was something hypnotic about the way he spoke, not with anger but with raw honesty. It was as if he wasn't just talking to Derek. He was speaking directly to the part of him that craved validation, that fed on cruelty to mask its own insecurities. When I joined the Marines, Malik continued, everything changed. They taught me discipline, respect, humility. They showed me that true strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up. It's about using your power to protect, not to harm. And let me tell you, it's a lesson I wish I'd learned a lot sooner. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them, drawn by the intensity of the confrontation. Students whispered to each other, speculating about what would happen next. Some sympathized with Amara, nodding in agreement with Malik's words. Others looked at Derek with pity, wondering if he'd ever recover from this public dressing down. Derek, meanwhile, was struggling to process everything. His mind raced, trying to come up with a response, but nothing seemed adequate. How could he argue with someone who had lived through what he described? How could he justify his behavior when Malik had laid it bare for everyone to see? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Derek managed to speak. I'm sorry, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, He trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes, though he blinked them away quickly, unwilling to let anyone see him cry. But the damage was done. The mask of invincibility he'd worn for so long had cracked, revealing the fragile boy underneath. Malik studied him for a moment longer before nodding slowly. Apologizing is a start, he said, his tone softening slightly. But actions speak louder than words. If you really mean it, if you truly regret what you've done, then prove it. Change the way you treat people. Be better. With that, Malik turned his attention back to Amara. You okay, sis? He asked gently, his earlier fierceness replaced by warmth and concern. Amara nodded, managing a small smile despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Yeah, she replied. Thanks, Malik. I'm always here for you, he said firmly. Don't ever forget that. Then, with a final glance at Derek, he added, and remember, kid, real strength comes from respect, not fear. The call ended, leaving the hallway eerily silent once again. Derek stood rooted to the spot, his cheeks burning with shame as the weight of Malik's words settled over him. Around him, students began to disperse, returning to their conversations and routines. But the memory of what had just happened lingered, etched into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. For Amara, the moment marked a turning point. She'd always known she was strong, but seeing her brother defend her in such a powerful way had reaffirmed her belief in herself. For Derek, however, it was the beginning of something entirely new, a journey toward understanding, accountability, and growth. And though neither of them realized it yet, their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't have imagined. That evening, Derek sat alone in his dimly lit bedroom, the faint glow of his phone screen casting shadows across his face. The confrontation with Malik replayed in his mind like a broken record, each word echoing louder than the last. He couldn't shake the image of Malik's piercing gaze or the way his voice had cut through the hallway, leaving no room for excuses. Derek felt exposed, as if every insecurity he'd ever tried to bury had been laid bare for the entire school to see. He leaned back against his bed, staring at the ceiling, and let out a heavy sigh. For years, he'd prided himself on being untouchable, the guy everyone wanted to be friends with, the one who always had the last laugh. But now, sitting in the quiet solitude of his room, he realized how hollow that persona really was. All those insults, all those put-downs, they hadn't made him stronger or happier. They'd only masked the emptiness inside him. And today, Malik had peeled back the layers, revealing the truth. Derek wasn't the confident, fearless leader he pretended to be. He was just a scared kid trying to prove something to himself, and failing miserably. As he thought about it, memories began to surface, moments he'd buried deep in his subconscious because they were too painful to confront. He remembered the first time he'd lashed out at someone weaker than him. It had been in middle school during gym class. A smaller boy named Ethan had accidentally tripped over Derek's foot while running laps. Instead of helping him up, Derek had laughed, calling him clumsy and pathetic. The other kids had joined in, and for the first time, Derek had felt powerful. That feeling became addictive, a drug he couldn't get enough of. Over the years, he'd targeted anyone who seemed vulnerable. The new kid with an accent, the shy girl who never spoke up, the nerdy boy who spent lunch reading books. Each time the rush of superiority dulled the ache of his own insecurities, for a little while at least. But tonight, those same insecurities came roaring back, fiercer than ever. Derek thought about his father, a stern man who rarely showed affection and often criticized Derek for not being tough enough. He thought about his mother, who worked long hours and barely had time to ask how his day went. Most of all, he thought about the pressure he felt to live up to everyone's expectations, to be the star athlete, the popular kid, the golden boy. Deep down he knew he didn't measure up, and so he compensated by tearing others down, convincing himself that if he could make them feel smaller, maybe he'd feel bigger. The guilt weighed heavily on him, pressing down on his chest until it was hard to breathe. He replayed the scene in the hallway over and over again, cringing at every cruel thing he'd said to Amara. Her hair, her grades, her confidence. It infuriated him because it reminded him of everything he lacked. She was proud of who she was, unapologetically herself, and he hated that. Or maybe he envied it. Derek grabbed his phone and opened Instagram, scrolling aimlessly through posts. His fingers hovered over Amara's profile picture, a bright smiling selfie she'd taken outside on a sunny afternoon. Her caption read, "Be you. Everyone else is already taken." He stared at it for a long time, wondering how someone could radiate so much self-assurance when the world constantly tried to knock them down. If anything, Derek's taunts should have crushed her spirit. But instead, she'd stood tall, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. That took real strength, the kind he'd never possessed. Suddenly, a notification popped up on his screen. It was a message from his best friend, Jake. "Yo, what happened today? Everyone's talking about it." Derek hesitated before typing a reply. What could he say? That he'd been humiliated by a girl's Marine brother? That he'd been called out for being a bully and didn't know how to defend himself? Admitting any of that felt impossible, but lying would only dig him deeper into the hole he was already in. Finally, he typed, "I messed up big time. I don't even know where to start." To his surprise, Jake responded almost immediately. "Start by owning it. You can't change what you did, but you can decide what happens next." Drew blinked at the screen, rereading the message several times. Coming from Jake, the king of avoiding responsibility, this advice felt oddly profound. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe Derek couldn't undo the damage he'd caused, but he could take steps to make things right, or at least try. The next morning, Derek woke up early, his stomach churning with nerves. He hadn't slept well, tossing and turning as he rehearsed what he wanted to say to Amara. He knew apologizing wouldn't magically erase the hurt he'd caused, but it was a start. And if Malik was right, if actions spoke louder than words, then Derek needed to show Amara that he meant it. When he arrived at school, he spotted her sitting at a table in the cafeteria, flipping through a textbook. She looked calm and focused, completely unaware of his presence. Taking a deep breath, Derek approached her, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of conversation around them. Amara glanced up, her expression guarded. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone neutral but firm. Derek swallowed hard, his throat dry. I wanted to apologize," he stammered, shifting uncomfortably. "For yesterday, for everything I said. It was wrong, and I'm sorry." For a moment, Amara simply stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face for sincerity. Then, slowly, she closed her book and leaned back in her chair. "You're apologizing because you mean it?" she asked. "Or because you're scared of what my brother might do if you don't?" Her question caught him off guard, but he forced himself to answer honestly. "Both," he admitted. "At first, yeah. I was worried about Malik coming after me, but then I started thinking about what he said, about how my words actually affect people, and I realized I owe you an apology, not just because of him, but because of me. Because I was wrong." Amara studied him for another long moment before nodding slightly. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for saying that. It takes guts to admit when you're wrong." Derek exhaled, relief washing over him. "Does this mean you forgive me?" he asked hopefully. She shook her head. "Not yet," she replied. "Apologies are a beginning, not an ending. If you really mean it, show me. Change the way you treat people. Be better." Her words echoed Malik's almost perfectly, and Derek nodded, determination replacing the fear in his chest. "I will," he promised. "I'll do whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Derek began making small but meaningful changes. He stopped laughing at jokes that mocked others' appearances or abilities. When he heard classmates whispering cruel comments, he stepped in telling them to knock it off. At first, it felt unnatural, like swimming against the current, but gradually it became easier. People noticed the shift in his behavior, and while some teased him for going soft, others respected him for standing up for what was right. One day, during a diversity workshop organized by the school counselor, Derek raised his hand and shared his story. He talked about his past mistakes, the shame he'd felt after confronting Malik, and the lessons he'd learned about empathy and accountability. The room fell silent as he spoke, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. When he finished, Amara gave him a subtle nod of approval, and for the first time in a long while, Derek felt a sense of peace. Little by little, Derek's efforts began to pay off. Students who had once dismissed him as arrogant and selfish started seeing him in a new light. Teachers praised him for taking initiative, and even Amara acknowledged his progress, though she remained cautious. Forgiveness, she explained, was a process, one that required trust built over time. For Derek, the journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. He wasn't perfect, and he knew he still had a lot to learn. But with each step forward, he grew closer to becoming the person Malik had challenged him to be, someone defined not by fear or cruelty, but by respect and kindness. Derek's transformation didn't happen overnight. In fact, it was a slow and often frustrating process, one that tested his patience, resilience, and willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. But as the weeks turned into months, he began to notice subtle shifts in how others perceived him, and more importantly, how he perceived himself. Each small victory gave him the courage to keep pushing forward, even when doubt crept in. One evening, Derek found himself sitting at the kitchen table with his father, who had just returned home from work. His dad rarely engaged in meaningful conversations, preferring instead to unwind with the TV or a beer. But tonight was different. As Derek absent-mindedly scrolled through his phone, his father glanced up from the newspaper he'd been reading and cleared his throat. "So," his dad began gruffly, "I heard you've been acting differently lately." Derek froze, unsure of what to say. He hadn't expected anyone in his family to notice his efforts, let alone comment on them. "What do you mean?" he asked cautiously. His father folded the newspaper and set it aside, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Derek's. "Your coach mentioned something about you standing up for one of your teammates during practice last week. Said you told off some guys who were giving him a hard time." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The memory was fresh in his mind. One of the younger players on the team, a freshman named Tyler, had been struggling to keep up during drills. A few of the upperclassmen had started teasing him, calling him names and mocking his mistakes. Derek had stepped in, telling them to back off and reminding them that everyone starts somewhere. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. It just felt like the right thing to do. But hearing his father bring it up now made him nervous. "Yeah," Derek admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "I guess I did." His father studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Derek's surprise, he nodded slowly. "Good," he said simply. "About time you started acting like a leader instead of a follower." The words caught Derek off guard. For years, he'd assumed his father only valued toughness and dominance, the kind of traits he associated with being a real man. But this quiet acknowledgement of growth felt monumental. It wasn't exactly praise, but it was close enough to make Derek sit a little straighter in his chair. "Thanks," he muttered, unsure of how else to respond. His father grunted and went back to his newspaper, signaling the end of the conversation. But for Derek, the exchange lingered long after the kitchen fell silent. It was proof that change, no matter how gradual, could ripple outward, affecting not just him but those around him too. At school, Derek continued to challenge himself in ways he never thought possible. He joined a student-led initiative aimed at fostering inclusivity and respect among classmates. The group met twice a week to brainstorm ideas for workshops, discussions, and campaigns designed to address issues like bullying, discrimination, and mental health awareness. At first, Derek felt out of place among the other members, many of whom had been advocates for these causes long before he decided to get involved. They eyed him skeptically, wondering if his sudden interest was genuine or just another attempt to improve his reputation, but Derek didn't let their doubts deter him. He showed up to every meeting, listened intently to their ideas, and contributed whenever he could. Slowly but surely, they began to trust him, or at least tolerate him. One day during a brainstorming session, Derek raised his hand hesitantly. "What if we organized a mentorship program?" he suggested. Older students could pair up with younger ones to help them adjust to high school life, not just academically, but socially too, like showing them how to handle stuff like peer pressure or bullying. The room fell silent as everyone processed his idea. Finally, one of the group leaders, a senior named Mia, broke the silence. "That's actually not a bad suggestion," she said, her tone softening slightly. "It could work, if we structure it properly." Encouraged by her response, Derek threw himself into planning the program. He reached out to teachers, administrators, and even former bullies turned allies like Jake to help spread the word. By the end of the semester, the mentorship initiative had gained traction, pairing dozens of students across grade levels. Watching freshmen walk the halls with newfound confidence thanks to their mentors filled Derek with a sense of accomplishment he'd never experienced before. Despite his progress, there were still moments when old habits threatened to resurface. One afternoon, while hanging out with Jake and a few other friends, Derek overheard a snide comment about Amara's latest project presentation. She had aced it, earning praise from their teacher and applause from the class. But one of the boys muttered under his breath, "Yeah, sure, she's smart, but does she have to rub it in everyone's face?" Derek felt a familiar surge of irritation rise in his chest. Part of him wanted to ignore the remark, to let it slide like he used to. But another part, a stronger, more determined part, knew he couldn't stay silent anymore. Taking a deep breath, he turned to face the boy. "She earned that," Derek said firmly. "And if you've got a problem with someone succeeding, maybe you should focus on stepping up your own game instead of tearing hers down." The boy blinked in surprise, clearly unprepared for Derek's reaction. "Whoa, chill out," he said, defensively. "I was just joking." "No, you weren't," Derek shot back. "You were jealous. And that's fine. Jealousy happens. But don't take it out on her. She works hard, and she deserves every bit of success she gets." The group fell silent, staring at Derek as if seeing him for the first time. After a moment, Jake clapped him on the shoulder and grinned. "All right, Captain, save the day," he teased. "Point taken." Though the interaction left Derek feeling drained, it also reinforced his commitment to staying true to his new values. Every choice mattered. Every word carried weight, and every action shaped the person he was becoming. As winter approached, Derek found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since that fateful day in the hallway. He wasn't the same guy who had taunted Amara or mocked Tyler, or laughed along with cruel jokes. Those pieces of him still existed. They always would, but they no longer defined him. Instead, he was learning to embrace a new identity, someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. Someone who sought forgiveness rather than resentment. Someone who understood that real strength came from empathy, not intimidation. One Friday afternoon, as the final bell rang and students poured out of classrooms, Derek spotted Amara packing up her things at her locker. Gathering his courage, he walked over to her, his hands shoved nervously into his pockets. "Hey," he said, offering a tentative smile. "Got a minute?" Amara looked up, her expression cautious but curious. "Sure," she replied, "and what's up?" Derek took a deep breath. "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself. I know I messed up big time, and I'm still working on being better, but knowing you're willing to see me differently, it means a lot." Amara regarded him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're welcome," she said. "And I'll admit you've come a long way. Just don't stop, okay? Keep going." "I will," Derek promised, his voice steady. "I owe it to you, and to myself." As they parted ways, Derek couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was walking it with purpose. And that, he realized, was worth everything. The school's annual award ceremony was always a big deal. Held in the gymnasium, it was an event filled with anticipation, pride, and a touch of nervous energy. Students dressed in their best outfits, parents snapped photos from the bleachers, and teachers beamed as they handed out certificates and trophies to recognize achievements both academic and extracurricular. For most attendees, it was a chance to celebrate hard work and accomplishments. But for Derek Collins and Amara Johnson, this year's ceremony carried a deeper significance, one that neither of them could have predicted just months earlier. Derek arrived early, adjusting his tie nervously in the mirror of the boys' locker room. He wasn't used to dressing up. His usual uniform consisted of jerseys and sweatpants. Tonight, however, he wore a crisp button-down shirt tucked into black slacks, his hair combed neatly to the side. As he stared at his reflection, he couldn't help but think about how far he'd come since the beginning of the school year. Back then, he wouldn't have given the award ceremony a second thought. It was just another boring event where teachers patted themselves on the back for doing their jobs. Now, though, he felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. This wasn't just any night. It was a chance to prove, to himself, to Amara, to everyone, that his efforts hadn't been in vain. When he entered the gym, the space had already transformed into a sea of balloons, banners, and sparkling lights. Rows of chairs were set up facing a stage adorned with a podium and a large banner that read, "Celebrating Excellence." Students milled around, chatting excitedly while parents searched for seats. Derek scanned the crowd, spotting Jake and a few other teammates near the front. He waved but didn't join them right away. Instead, he lingered near the entrance, waiting for someone specific. Amara walked in moments later, her presence commanding attention without her even trying. She wore a simple yet elegant navy blue dress that hugged her frame perfectly, paired with gold earrings that caught the light every time she moved. Her natural hair, styled into soft curls, framed her face like a halo. Derek swallowed hard, suddenly feeling underdressed despite his best efforts. She spotted him almost immediately, raising an eyebrow as she approached. "You clean up nice," she said with a small smile, breaking the ice. Derek chuckled nervously. "Thanks. You look amazing." She nodded, accepting the compliment graciously, before glancing toward the stage. "So, are you ready for tonight?" she asked. He shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "As ready as I'll ever be. Still can't believe I'm getting recognized for anything good." Amara gave him a knowing look. "Well, maybe it's because you've earned it. Don't sell yourself short." Her words hit home, reminding him of why he'd worked so hard to change. It wasn't just about earning forgiveness or approval. It was about proving to himself that he could be better. That he was better. As the ceremony began, the principal took the stage to deliver opening remarks. The usual speeches followed. Gratitude. To teachers, congratulations to students, but Derek barely heard them. His mind raced, replaying everything that had led him to this moment. From the hallway confrontation with Malik to the countless hours spent volunteering and mentoring younger students, each step had been part of a journey he never imagined embarking on. And now, here he was, sitting among peers who once dismissed him as nothing more than a bully. Finally, it was time for the awards. The first few categories flew by quickly. Highest GPA, most improved student, outstanding athlete. Then came the leadership awards, a category Derek hadn't expected to hear his name called in. When the principal announced Amara as the recipient of the Excellence in Leadership Award, the entire gym erupted in applause. She made her way to the stage gracefully, accepting the plaque with a humble smile. In her acceptance speech, she thanked her family, friends, and teachers for supporting her along the way. Then, glancing briefly at Derek in the audience, she added, "Leadership isn't about being perfect, it's about learning, growing, and lifting others up even when it's hard." Her words resonated deeply with Derek, who clapped enthusiastically alongside everyone else. Watching her stand there, confident and composed, reminded him of why he admired her so much. She didn't just lead by example. She inspired others to do the same. Moments later, the principal returned to the podium to announce the next award, Outstanding Community Service. Derek froze when he heard his name. For a second, he wondered if he'd misheard, but the cheers from his classmates confirmed it. Shakily, he rose from his seat and walked toward the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. As he accepted the certificate, he glanced out at the crowd, meeting Amara's gaze. She gave him a subtle nod of encouragement, which steadied his nerves enough for him to speak. I wasn't sure what to say," Derek began, his voice trembling slightly. "But I guess I want to start by saying thank you. To my teachers, my friends, and especially to people like Amara, who challenged me to be better. A few months ago, I wouldn't have believed I'd be standing here today. Honestly, I didn't think I deserved to. But sometimes life gives you a wake-up call, and you have to decide whether to answer it or ignore it. I chose to answer mine, and I'm still working on being the person I want to be. So, if there's anyone out there who feels stuck or unsure about who they are, just know that it's never too late to change. You just have to take that first step." The gym erupted into applause again, louder this time. Derek stepped off the stage, his cheeks flushed but his spirit soaring. He returned to his seat where Jake slapped him on the back and whispered, "Not bad, man, not bad at all." After the ceremony ended, students spilled out onto the football field, celebrating beneath the stars. Music played softly in the background, as laughter and conversation filled the air. Derek found Amara sitting on a bench near the edge of the field, gazing up at the sky. He hesitated for a moment before joining her, careful not to interrupt whatever thoughts were running through her mind. "You did great up there," she said without looking at him. "Your speech, it was real, honest." "Thanks," Derek replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "I meant every word." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moonlight dance across the grass. Finally, Amara turned to him, her expression thoughtful. Do you remember what you said to me after Malik called you out? About wanting to show me you're serious about changing? Derek nodded. Yeah, I remember. Well, she continued, her lips curving into a faint smile. You've done that, more than I expected, honestly. And while I don't forget easily, I also believe in second chances, so consider this your fresh start. Her words hit Derek like a wave, washing away the lingering doubts he'd carried for so long. He exhaled, sharply, relief flooding through him. Thank you, he said quietly. That means a lot. Amara shrugged, her tone light but sincere. Just don't screw it up, okay? Derek laughed, the sound genuine and full of gratitude. No promises, he joked, but I'll try my best. As they sat there together, surrounded by the hum of celebration, Derek realized something profound. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. It was about acknowledging your mistakes, learning from them, and using those lessons to build a better future. Not just for yourself, but for the people around you. And for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that he could continue down this path, hopeful that he could inspire others to do the same, and hopeful that maybe he was finally becoming the person he'd always wanted to be. Months passed and life at the high school settled into its usual rhythm. Classes, sports, friendships. But the ripple effects of Derek's transformation continued to spread. The changes he'd made weren't just surface level. They had taken root in ways that touched nearly everyone around him. What started as a personal journey toward redemption had become something bigger, a catalyst for positive change within the school community. Derek's involvement in the mentorship program grew more meaningful with each passing week. He spent hours after school helping younger students navigate challenges both big and small. Whether it was tutoring a freshman struggling with math, offering advice on how to deal with cliques, or simply listening when someone needed to vent, Derek poured his energy into making a difference. At first, some of the younger kids were hesitant to open up to him, unsure if they could trust the former bully. But over time, his consistency won them over. They saw that he wasn't there to judge or lecture. He genuinely cared about their success and well-being. One afternoon, while walking through the hallway, Derek noticed Tyler, the same freshman he'd defended during football practice months earlier, chatting animatedly with a group of classmates. When Tyler spotted Derek, he waved enthusiastically and jogged over to greet him. Hey, Derek, Tyler said, grinning from ear to ear. Guess what? I made the JV team. Derek's face lit up with genuine pride. No way. That's awesome, man. Congratulations. Tyler nodded eagerly. Thanks. I couldn't have done it without your help. You know, pushing me to keep going even when I wanted to quit. Derek chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair playfully. Nah, you did all the hard work. I just reminded you that you're stronger than you think. But Tyler shook his head, his expression serious for a moment. It's not just that. You showed me it's okay to stand up for myself and for others. Like last week, some guys were teasing one of my friends and I told them to stop. And guess what? They actually listened. The sincerity in Tyler's voice struck a chord deep within Derek. In that moment, he realized the true impact of his actions. It wasn't just about changing himself. It was about inspiring others to do the same. By standing up against negativity and modeling kindness, he was planting seeds of courage and empathy that would grow far beyond his reach. Meanwhile, Amara watched Derek's progress from afar, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. She hadn't forgiven him overnight, nor had she forgotten the pain his words once caused, but she couldn't deny the effort he'd put into becoming a better person. More importantly, she recognized the value of second chances, not just for Derek, but for everyone. During a spring assembly focused on diversity and inclusion, Amara delivered a powerful speech about resilience and self-worth. Standing at the podium, she spoke candidly about her own experiences with bullying and discrimination, emphasizing that true strength comes from embracing who you are, despite the obstacles. As she wrapped up her remarks, she glanced toward Derek, who sat near the front row, listening intently. "In our lives," she said, addressing the audience, "we'll encounter people who try to bring us down. Some will do it out of ignorance, others out of fear, but we also meet people who challenge us to rise above, to be better versions of ourselves. To those individuals I say this: thank you. Because growth often begins with discomfort, and healing starts with accountability." Her eyes locked briefly with Derek's, and though she didn't say his name, the message was clear. Derek felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the weight of her words. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense. It was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of his efforts, his vulnerability, and his potential, and for Derek, that meant everything. As graduation approached, the senior class buzzed with excitement and nostalgia. Yearbooks were signed, memories shared, and plans made for the future. For Derek, the milestone carried an extra layer of significance. Just a year ago, he'd been aimless, coasting through life without direction or purpose. Now he stood on the brink of adulthood with a renewed sense of clarity. He knew exactly where he wanted to go and who he wanted to be. On the day of graduation, Derek stood alongside his classmates, dressed in a cap and gown that felt foreign yet fitting. As names were called and diplomas handed out, he scanned the crowd, spotting familiar faces: his parents, who smiled proudly from the bleachers; Jake, who gave him a thumbs up; and Amara, who offered a subtle nod of encouragement. When his name was announced, he walked across the stage with confidence, shaking hands with teachers and administrators who had witnessed his transformation firsthand. After the ceremony, Derek lingered on the field, soaking in the bittersweet atmosphere. High school was officially behind him, but the lessons he'd learned would stay with him forever. As he wandered among groups of celebrating graduates, he spotted Malik standing near the edge of the crowd. The Marine had flown in for the occasion, eager to see his sister, and perhaps to check on Derek too. "Congrats, kid," Malik said, extending a hand. "Heard you've been doing good work." Derek shook his hand firmly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you, sir, for everything. If it weren't for you, I don't know where I'd be right now." Malik smirked, clapping him on the shoulder. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You did the hard part. You chose to change." The two men shared a brief, meaningful look before Malik turned his attention to Amara, who joined them moments later. Together, the three of them stood side by side, reflecting on how far they'd come since that fateful day in the hallway. Years later, Derek would look back on his high school years as a turning point, a chapter defined not by mistakes but by redemption. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught him invaluable lessons about humility, empathy, and resilience. He went on to pursue a career in social work, dedicating his life to helping young people overcome adversity and find their voice. Along the way, he stayed in touch with Amara, whose unwavering strength continued to inspire him. Their paths may have diverged, but the bond they formed remained unshaken. Both had grown in ways neither could have anticipated, shaped not only by their struggles but by their willingness to confront them head-on. And though they rarely spoke of the past, they carried its lessons with them always, as reminders of where they'd been and how far they'd come. In the end, their story became a testament to the power of accountability, forgiveness, and second chances. It proved that even in moments of darkness, there is always hope for light, and that sometimes, all it takes is one life-changing call to set things in motion.